Good morning, good evening, everyone. I hope you guys had an amazing day and hopefully your August has been started well. We're very excited to have Alina, First Security of High Commissioner of Canada, and Edita, Outreach Officer Migration of High Commissioner of Canada today with us. They're going to update us on the study permit processing and the changes that have been occurred during the COVID time. I'm gonna take it 1 or 2 minutes. I'm gonna let Alina and Indita to introduce themselves. As you guys remember, the first 30 minutes or so of the presentation we will allocate to the presentation, and the 45 minutes around the Q&A. We have received many good questions. Please use the question box in your panel to write your question down, and we try to address and answer as many as possible. And we'll share the recording of this presentation later on with you guys. So hopefully this be useful and answer the questions that you may have. I'll stop talking and I'll let Alina and Anita to take over of the presentation. And Elena and Anita, really thank you for being with us today. Really appreciate it. I know it's been super busy time for you guys, and just taking the time and updating our partners and updating our students around what's happening and the measures and all the exceptions that have been made for students. We really appreciate it. So once again, thanks everyone. I'll let you guys take over.
Thank you so much, Meeti. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Meeti, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for inviting us to be a part of this webinar where we will be sharing hopefully, what will be important information for all the clients. We are trying, IRCC is trying to provide as much information, updated information to as many different stakeholders, clients over the course of the time that the pandemic has started, and there is only so much that we can do through our social media, so platforms like this are really helpful. So without any further ado, let's get on with the presentation. Good afternoon, everyone. As Meti said, my name is Anindita Buragohai. I am the Outreach Officer for IRCC Delhi, and I will be making the presentation today, sharing important information with you regarding the travel restrictions imposed currently to travel to Canada, and also the temporary changes that have been put in place with regard to study permit processing. But before I start, I have to iterate, as something that we all are pretty much aware of, that international students contribute majorly to the social and cultural fabric of the Canadian society. And in terms of economy as well, international students contribute to more than $21 billion in terms of economic activity. And as such, we hold international students on a great priority, and that is the reason why, since the onset of the pandemic, IRCC has tried to come up with numerous changes and relief measures, and also tried to support all institutes, colleges, and universities in Canada, along with the international students, so that we can provide as much information and make the process of studying in Canada as smooth as it used to be before the onset of the pandemic. So having said that, we would definitely encourage all students to continue their plans of studying in Canada, in spite of the fact that, which we are aware, that quite a lot of institutions have gone ahead and announced that their entire fall 2020 semester till December 31st will continue to be online. But in spite of that, we would still encourage students to go ahead and continue planning their studies in Canada, and also prior to that, the most important thing, to go ahead and apply for their visas. And today in my presentation, I will be sharing important information regarding that. So let's move on to the next slide to see what we have on our agenda today. Okay, so as you can see on our agenda today are things that we will be covering, and they range from the travel restrictions in Canada, and the exemptions on those travel restrictions, the study permit processing changes, including the new two-stage approval process which has been put in place, the impact of the online format on the post-graduation work permit. We will also be sharing a few fraud tips, and we will also be telling you about what one needs to do as and when you decide to fly to Canada, and what should be your plan regarding mandatory quarantine that has been set up by the Public Health Agency in Canada. So let's begin then. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, as most of you are aware, that to protect Canadians from the outbreak of COVID-19, the Government of Canada had implemented travel restrictions which limit the travel to Canada. And those limitations are currently in place and have recently also been extended till August 31st, 2020. So until further notice, most foreign nationals are not allowed to travel to Canada, even if they hold a valid visitor visa or an electronic travel authorization, which is more commonly known as an ETA. These restrictions stop non-essential or non-discretionary travel to Canada. I'm assuming you understand what that means, but I will be explaining a little bit more in detail in my following slides. So can we have the next slide now? Thank you. So who can and cannot enter Canada? In light of the travel restrictions, the list that you see in front of you reflects who is currently able to travel to Canada. So you can see that Canadian citizens are allowed to travel to Canada, Canadian permanent residents, and also protected persons. There are certain foreign nationals who are also allowed entry to Canada, but they can only enter the country if their entry is for an essential purpose and are exempt as per the travel restrictions that have been imposed. Moving on to the next slide. Now let's talk about the exemptions to these travel restrictions. So as you can see, there are certain people who can come to Canada for essential purposes. So as you can see, there are certain temporary foreign workers, some international students, and some approved residents. Basically, all temporary residents who want to travel to Canada need to demonstrate that they are traveling for an essential purpose. Now, what does essential refer to? It refers to traveling which is non-discretionary and not optional. As per emergency orders made under the Quarantine Act, people who are planning to travel to Canada for optional or discretionary purposes are not allowed to enter the country. So what would these optional or discretionary purposes entail? Definitely something like tourism, recreation, or entertainment. But what does it especially mean in the case of students? In the case of students, it essentially means that students whose classes have already been announced or whose DLIs have already announced that they will have online classes till 31st of December 2020, for those students, their travel to Canada is considered non-essential at this point of time. So that is why they would not ideally fit under this list of exemptions for the travel restrictions. As I had mentioned, there are certain visitors who are exempt from traveling to Canada under these travel restrictions because they might be going there to reunite with immediate family members. So if any of these visitors are planning to travel to Canada, they will need an authorization letter to travel to Canada if their family whom they are going to see in Canada is not a Canadian citizen or are not Canadian PRs. However, for students and workers, these kind of an authorization letter will not be required. And in order to obtain the authorization letter, the email address is mentioned on the slide. So if you think you know of someone or you have people who would need to travel to Canada to reunite with their family, then they will need to write to this particular email address. For a more comprehensive list of exemptions, you need to visit our website at canada.ca and go on our website under this particular link, which is highlighted at the end in orange on this slide. So just giving you a couple of seconds in case you want to take any picture of this. Now, moving on to the next slide. Okay, So because are talking specifically about students today, let's look a little bit more in detail about the exemption to travel restrictions for international students. As mentioned, all students will be able to travel to Canada. Sorry, not all students will be able to travel to Canada under the current travel restrictions. So what are the exemptions to this kind of a travel restriction? To be exempt, the student must be in possession of either one of these two. So either a valid study permit, which was issued on or before March 18th, 2020, or a port of entry letter of introduction, which indicates that they had a study permit which was approved on or before March 18th, 2020. Now, just having either one of these documents will not suffice. The additional thing, which is also an equally important, if not more, thing to this entire travel exemption is that the student must demonstrate that it is essential for them to travel to Canada. So, for example, if they have in-person classes or they were already in the middle of a program and in order to continue it or finish it, they must return to Canada and be there to attend the classes physically. And this they can demonstrate by providing a very recently dated letter from their institution, which explains why they physically need to be in Canada for the fall semester. And these documents must ideally be provided to the airline at the time of boarding the flight and the Canadian Border Security Agency officer once the student reaches the port of entry in Canada. So in case the student doesn't have this letter and fails to submit it when asked for it, then they will either be denied boarding of the flight, or if by chance they do end up landing in Canada, they will be forced to return from Canada at their own expense. And in case they do have they do fit into this exemption bill, they either have any one of the two documents and also have a document to show that their travel to Canada is essential, they will not require any authorization letter, as has already been mentioned. All they need to show is their visa or their port of entry letter. It is also very important that if a student qualifies for these exemptions, they should not travel to Canada until at most 3 weeks before the start of their class, for which their physical presence in Canada is required. And for those who have already been issued visas for a previous semester but were not able to travel to Canada to attend, they need to send us a copy of their new letter of acceptance and advise us of their new start date. So in order to get this revised letter of acceptance, they need to get in touch with their institute or college or university in Canada. And you can send these documents to us via the web form, which is also available on our official website. Moving on to the next slide. So we've talked about the imposed travel restrictions and the exemptions for those and what are the special cases for students. Let's talk about the processing changes that have come into place since the onset of this pandemic. Now, a few of those changes, in fact, most of those changes are quite temporary and they are subject to change. So a disclaimer actually, which I meant to share with you right at the beginning of the presentation, is whatever information I am sharing with you in terms of the presentation today is only valid for today. Because as we all understand, everywhere in the world, things are changing very rapidly in terms of policies, in terms of restrictions with regards to travel and visas and permits. So whenever you want to have the most updated information, please visit our website, or you can also follow us on our Facebook pages. Facebook and Twitter. For India, it's Canada in India. For Nepal, it's Canada in Nepal, and for Bhutan, it's Canada in Bhutan. So you can keep following us for a specific country-related information. So moving on, like I said, everything that I'm sharing today is valid only as of today. So even these processing changes, which I'll be talking about, are valid only as of today. So what has been the most recent change? One of the most important changes which has been in place and especially applies a lot to students is that we are no longer accepting any kind of paper applications because, as you might already be aware, visa application centers are currently closed. So this means that we are unable to accept any paper applications or submissions, and that's why only online submissions are being accepted. Another change has been of the processing times. So usually, if you are aware, we publish our processing times, which are updated on a weekly basis for different types of study permits, visas, or work permits, or any other kind of visas that we are processing. But because all our offices are working with very limited or reduced staff, currently our processing times have not been very accurate, and that is why even if you see some processing times published on our website, they might not be the most accurate processing times. In spite of this, we at IRCC India, Delhi especially, are working very hard to process all the visa applications in time for the fall 2020 semester, so that the students who are meant to start their classes very soon do not get affected by this. But in order to do this, we need your help, and you need to submit your application to us as early as possible if you have not done that already, and you need to submit us all the required documents as soon as possible. We are, however, aware that there are a lot of service disruptions that are causing delays in submitting a complete application. So, for example, because VACs are closed, people are not able to submit their biometrics at this time. Or especially in the case of students who also need to submit medical examination reports, panel physicians are either not operating in certain places or they're operating at very limited capacity. So this, of course, means that their students, prospective students, are not able to go for their appointments and complete their immigration medical exam. We also understand that a lot of businesses and schools remain closed, because of which a lot of school results or college results for the last examinations that students might have appeared for have still not been published. And because of that, a lot of students are still not able to get their final transcripts to attach with their application forms. Having said all of these, we would like to definitely say that we will not refuse any applications for non-compliance or failure to submit the requested documents at this time, because we understand that we are all operating with different limitations, and these limitations might be very different from place to place, city to city, and country to country. This also means that the students do not have to worry about the deadlines which are specified in the request letters sent to them, especially the deadlines for biometric submission or medical exam report submission. However, one thing very important that needs to be noted is that we will not be able to complete the processing of the application until all required and requested documents have been received. So, we say this that it is in your favor that you need to try and submit documents as soon as possible, as early as possible. Uh, like as already mentioned, there might be quite a few documents which you are not able to submit at this time because of a lot of limitations, but there are three exceptions to this entire rule, or I wouldn't say exceptions, but these are actually the three non-negotiables with regard to this. So the three non-negotiables are your application forms, your IRCC application form, which needs to be completed and submitted. That is one of the most important documents when you're submitting your study permit application. The second is, of course, your fee. Now, the fee has two parts to it. One is the study permit application fee, and the other is your biometric fee. So eventually, when VACs open, you will have to submit your biometrics. So you need to submit your biometric fee right at the beginning when you're submitting your online application, because otherwise the system won't let you go ahead with the application process. And the other most important non-negotiable document for a student is the letter of acceptance which they receive from their university college in Canada. This is mandatory to be submitted with the application form for a study permit. Um, Please understand that because of the VAC closures, we are physically unable to issue any visas, and we will not be able to do so till VACs reopen, because we don't have a two-way mechanism transmission of passports in place. And that is the reason we cannot transmit passports from our office to the VAC office and from the VAC office to the client, not at this point of time. What we are, however, trying to do, and we are attempting our best to do this very much in time right now, is to return the passports for any existing paper files that we might have received before the lockdown situation happened, especially in India. So we're trying to return all those passports, because we understand that the passport is a very important identity document which someone would like to hold on to. And any documents mailed to our mission at this point in time directly by a student or directly by an agent or a client will not be accepted and will be returned to the sender immediately. So moving on to the next slide, we'll be talking about what are the most important changes with regard to the processing in terms of applications which were not approved before March 18th. So as per the recently introduced measures, what are the things that we are currently addressing and what are the temporary changes that are currently put in place? So one of the most important things is that we are prioritizing on processing all study permit applications which have been submitted completely. That is, we have all the required documents for that particular application in terms of forms, fees, medicals, biometrics, English language test results, LOA, and any other supporting document that we expect to receive as part of the study permit application. Now, what is the other change or the other temporary policy that has been put in place? There is a special provision which has been put in place for the postgraduate work permit. So the postgraduate work permit, as students will obviously know, is the work permit that students receive after they have finished their course of study in Canada. And this is related to the course or the duration of their studies in Canada. So if a student is taking up a course or program of study which will qualify them for a postgraduate work permit, and part of their course, which will ideally be the fall 2020 currently, has been moved to an online format because of the pandemic, then the time spent on the online portion while outside of Canada will still be counted towards the post-graduation work permit. However, one thing to note is that the online portion that the student takes up outside of Canada must be 50% or less of their entire program of study, which essentially means that they will still need to complete at minimum half of their program in Canada for their entire course duration to be counted towards their PGWP. And the other very important change, which is a very recent change that has been put in place, is that a new two-stage approval process for study permit applications has been introduced. This is especially meant for those students who are at this point in time unable to provide their biometrics or their medicals. So what happens is this particular processing takes place in two stages. The first stage is what we call the approval in principle, or AIP. This essentially is about the eligibility assessment of the application. And if a student receives an AIP approval, it means that their online course time will count towards their time for PGWP, which means that they do not have to wait for a physical visa to be issued to them for their PGWP for that time of their studies to be qualified for their PGWP. Now, at the second stage of this processing is what we look at is the admissibility part of the applicant or the student. And this is where final decisions on applications are made. And this is also the part where physical visas will be issued. Uh, Important to note that if a student has received an application in principle or an approval in principle, it doesn't guarantee that they will be issued a physical visa, because they might also be refused a visa at stage 2, which includes admissibility decisions. For example, they may be refused a visa despite having an AIP in the first stage because they failed their medical exam. So that is something that students need to keep in mind. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, so we've talked about the two-stage processing, and the first stage, as mentioned, is what we call the approval in principle. So it applies to applications who have not yet received a final decision as of March 18th, and it refers to the eligibility assessment of the application. Essentially, it means that even though the applicant is missing medicals or biometrics because they're not able to submit it right now, we will still be able to uh, assess their application and provide them with an approval in principle. And the criteria, however, for this assessment has not changed, and neither have the requirements based on which an assessor will assess a study permit application. So as you can see on the slide, you will still have to show proof and genuine proof of all the important things which were always required to show that you are a genuine student in Canada. So you obviously have to show that you are qualified to take up the course for which you are going to study in Canada, and you also have the language ability, so that you show by way of your transcripts from your previous school or college, and also by way of your English language test, whether it is an IELTS or a TOEFL. You definitely have to show that you have been accepted by a DLI, which is a designated learning institute in Canada. You have to show that you have sufficient funds to not only pay for your studies during the entire course of your study in Canada, but also how you are going to sustain yourself in terms of your living expenses and transportation while you are studying in Canada. And a very important thing is that you also have to show genuine proof that you will leave Canada at the end of your authorized stay. And this you do by showing that you have uh, genuine ties to your home country, which will motivate you to leave Canada and return to your home country at the end of your studies. So this is essentially what will be assessed as previously, even before pre-pandemic, and this continues to be assessed even during the first stage of your processing, which is the approval in principle. Once you receive an approval in principle in your application, a letter will be sent to you electronically to relay this information to you. And you may also receive requests for biometrics and medicals in case you have not submitted them earlier. Moving on to the next slide. So, as mentioned, the requirements for documentation in terms of a visa submission or a study permit application submission have not changed. So if you see on your screen, we have listed down all the requirements in terms of documentation, and they remain the same, especially for the student direct stream, because this is somewhere we get a lot of query and a lot of questions. As you can see, we still need the letter of acceptance from a DLI. We still need an IELTS of 6.0 in each band. Tuition fee for 1 year needs to be paid in advance. A GIC for 10,000 Canadian dollars needs to be made. Most recent secondary or post-secondary school transcripts need to be submitted. And also for Quebec-bound students, the certificate of acceptance also need to be submitted. And the same requirements for non-SDS or for the general study permit application also continues to be that. One tip that we can give to all students, whether they are applying through SDS or non-SDS, is that it is always a good thing to share in a letter of explanation why they have chosen the program of study which they are going to study in Canada, and how they plan to sustain themselves while they will be in Canada in terms of the financial expenses. Moving on to the next slide. Okay. In the first stage, of course, we look at the eligibility criteria, but in the second stage of the application processing, in the current two-stage process, we will be looking at admissibility. So what does admissibility ideally entail? It definitely means you have to submit the biometric information, submit your fingerprints, your photograph and passport details, the medical examination, which students usually ideally need to submit upfront, especially in the case of SDS. The documents that are submitted need to be authentic and genuine. Uh, the student has to be very truthful and should refrain from hiding any information with regards to any kind of personal details that have been asked in the application form, whether it is regarding previous visa refusals that they might have received, whether it was Canada or any other country, or if for whatever reason they have any kind of criminal record, anything of that sort, and all other information, including their education, work experience, everything needs to be very truthfully answered, and enough evidence needs to be provided to support all of the information that is mentioned in the application form. The next slide. Okay, we have mentioned that there are VAC closures and there are service disruptions, and we understand that due to VAC closures and service disruptions, applicants might not be able to submit a lot of the documents or a lot of the information which ideally would be required for a student direct stream. But because the requirement or the eligibility criteria for SDS or even the general visa application process has not changed, if for whatever reason the student is not able to submit along with their application form any of the information mentioned on this slide, then their application would be transferred to the non-SDS stream. So it will still be processed, and we don't mean that we will be refusing it just because you were submitted it under SDS and could not submit any of the documents listed here. It just means that the application will be processed under the non-SDS stream rather than the SDS stream. So moving on to the next slide. So this part talks about something which is of a great interest to students and also very important to know, especially at this time. So as we all know, international students in Canada are allowed to work. So they can work up to a maximum of 20 hours per week during course time or academic time, and full time when there is an academic break. Currently, students who are already in Canada can continue to work even if they become a part-time student or take a break in studies due to COVID-19. And what do they have to do in order to be eligible for this? They need to have been a full-time student, and they need to have been authorized to work either on or off campus while studying. So if a student switched to part-time studies or had to take a break in studies, whether it was a spring semester which was cancelled because of the pandemic, they can still continue working on and off campus. For off-campus work, the maximum limit is still 20 hours per week during the academic session. For students who are in essential services, which could include jobs in the health sector, they can work more than 20 hours per week up until August 31st, as this is also a temporary stipulation which has been put in place. To qualify for this, however, they need a valid study permit, they need to be currently in an academic session, they need to be authorized to work on and off campus, and they must be working in an essential job. For the students who are not yet in Canada, the following is a question that we come across a lot, and we are often asked this question, is that out of those maximum 20 hours per week, will they be allowed to work while they are taking online courses or classes in Canada? And if they do happen to end up landing in Canada, the short answer to this is no, because as per the current travel restrictions, the travel for those particular students is still considered non-essential. So if by whatever reason they are able to somehow land in Canada, they will still be taking their classes online. So they will still not be qualifying for working 20 hours on campus or off campus during course time, because they are ideally still not supposed to be in Canada as per the travel restrictions. So unless and until their physical presence is required for their studies in the fall semester, it is not essential for them to travel to Canada, and that is why they will not be able to work in Canada, even if by whatever reason somehow they do end up landing in Canada. Moving on to the next slide. So the next slide ideally also refers to students who have already begun their classes in Canada. There are a number of reasons, especially in the current scenario, why a DLI may authorize leave during studies, such as strikes, family emergencies, or even medical reasons in the current scenario. To still be considered actively pursuing studies, a student's authorized leave must not exceed 150 days from their first day of leave. And failure to do so means that they have not complied with the conditions of their study permit and may result in them being removed from Canada. If for whatever reason they require leave for longer than 150 days, they should change their status from student to visitor, and the forms and instructions on how to do that is available on our website. A very important thing to note is that while a student is on an authorized leave, they cannot study elsewhere or they cannot work. In case a DLI may have to close permanently as a consequence of the pandemic, then the student should either enroll themselves in a new program of study with another DLI, they or they can change their status from a student to visitor, or they need to leave Canada. And for the purpose of assessing if a student is enrolled and actively pursuing their studies, any time taken to transition to a new DLI and program, change status, or leave Canada should not exceed 150 days from the date the school closed. So now moving on to the next slide. Here we'll talk a little bit about the difference between distance learning and also online courses. Are we on the next slide? Yes, yeah, we are. So with the online format being set in place, there is a lot of confusion about distance learning and online courses. Distance learning courses ideally would be those which would anyways be offered remotely. So whether it was a COVID-19 scenario or a normal non-COVID-19 scenario, the student would be taking their classes remotely from anywhere else in the world and even from their home country. So that is what would ideally be a distance learning course. Now, what does an online course mean? So if the student was ideally supposed to take those classes in person, physically, sitting in a classroom in Canada, and for the reasons of the pandemic, those classes have now been scheduled to happen online or have been transferred to the online format, that is what will entail an online course. And DLIs will definitely return to those physical classes once things settle down a bit. So that is what is an online course right now. So those taking online courses for a program of study, which would normally qualify them for a PGWP, can have that time counted towards the PGWP, even if they have not yet begun their studies in Canada and are most likely taking classes right now from their home country. Students, as mentioned earlier, can complete 50% of their program online if they cannot travel to Canada sooner. For those students who have already begun their program of study in Canada, switching from full-time status to part-time status due to the pandemic will not affect their eligibility for the PGWP. This applies, however, to the winter, spring, and summer semesters. For the fall 2020 semester, it is expected that students take on a full online course load in order for that time to be counted towards their PGWP. Let's move to the next slide now and let's see what we have there. In the next slide, we're talking about fraud awareness. So how does one protect themselves from fraud and from getting defrauded? There is a lot of information out there which is quite a lot of times mostly incorrect, and people don't really realize it or understand that it is fraudulent or incorrect or untruthful until and unless they have actually fallen prey to it. So in order to verify whenever you receive any kind of information relating to visa process changes or documentation or visa fees or anything related to IRCC, please always go on our website and verify that information. You might find information on fraudulent websites. You might receive fraudulent emails. People might actually call you up saying that they're calling you from the IRCC. And whenever something like this happens to you, please always make sure to either go online and verify that information, or you can always write to us on social media and let us know, and we will then be able to direct you to the correct pages where you can go and see for yourself if the information that you're referring to is true or not. In addition to that, if students want to take help with regards to their visa application and submission, and also want someone to represent them in their visa application, then they need to consult authorized representatives. These representatives are legally qualified and they are legally permitted to represent you on your visa applications. And the way to find authorized representatives is by visiting the ICCRC website. So if you see the red scan code bar on your slide, if you just scan it, then it'll take you to the website of Immigration Consultants of Canada Regulatory Council, and that is where you can find authorized representatives to help one with their visa application. Moving on to the next slide now. So in this slide, let's look at certain conditions which you must or which students must abide by before they travel to Canada. The airline will definitely ask the student for their passport. They will also need to show valid study permit issued on or before March 18th, and they will also have to show, as per the current travel restrictions, documents that their travel to Canada is absolutely essential. So failure to provide any of these documents may result in them being denied boarding. And additionally, they might also be required to do a health check, which will be done by the airline officials. And if they happen to show any signs of COVID-19, they may also be denied boarding. If one is approved to board a flight, they need to wear a non-medical mask or face covering upon arrival in Canada. Moving on to the next slide. What happens once students travel and then land in Canada? What are these? This is not actually what happens once they land in Canada. This is something they need to have in place before they even decide to travel to Canada. Because as of now, all travelers who land in Canada must undergo a health checkup, and it is also mandatory for all passengers arriving in Canada to self-quarantine themselves for 14 days. So what does this mean for the students? This means that students need to have a 14-day quarantine plan in place even before they decide to board a flight. They must confirm and provide evidence of that and where they will be staying to have a suitable place to quarantine, and also share their address and explain how they intend to quarantine themselves if they are going to share that location with other people. And they also need to respect the quarantine plan, which means that they need to explain how they intend to get access to essential items like food, water, etc. Um, this might seem something very trivial, but this is absolutely very important because without a foolproof, viable quarantine plan in place, students should not even think of traveling to Canada because it might have consequences which will include but not be limited to a fine of up to 750,000 Canadian dollars, 6 months in prison, or being found inadmissible, removed from Canada, and banned from entering Canada for 1 year. So the quarantine plan is also equally important as the other things. That kind of brings us to the end of the information part. Let's move on to the next slide and share a few coordinates in terms of social media and our website. So as you can see, our official website is www.canada.ca/immigration. This is where you can find all updated information regarding visas, travel restrictions, quarantining yourself, and all of that. There is also an India-specific website which has more country-specific information. And you can also visit our Facebook and Twitter pages for most up-to-date information and especially country-specific information. And last but not the least, because online application is the way to go now, and it is the only way that students have for themselves to submit applications. The barcode which shows on your slide, if you scan that, it will download a PDF document. That PDF document is a step-by-step guide on how one can apply online. So that document will be very helpful. That document is also shareable, so you can also pass it on to other people so that whoever needs it can use this in order to apply online. And with that, I end my part of the presentation and I am handing it back to Meti now. So thank you all for being patient listeners, and I hope the information was helpful.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. It's, I think, listening from you guys definitely answer many questions. And thanks once again for being with us today. I'm going to start asking a question. I'm not joking if I say we have received over hundreds of questions. So I apologize in advance that if we cannot get an answer all of it. It's literally over 100 questions that we have. So I'm going to start with the question that we received before the presentation, those people that have submitted, and then move on with the questions that have been submitted as you guys were presenting. The first question is, someone is asking if the student has already submitted their visa for fall 2020, but meanwhile they have decided to defer their intake for January 2021, how that will impact the visa file, Will the students get visa approval in two stage? What do they need to do with updating you guys in terms of their the January, the deferral request?
Hi, Mehdi. Thanks very much for that question. And thank you again for inviting us to speak to your student population and your stakeholders in Canada. So to answer this question, the first thing the student needs to do is to send us an updated letter of acceptance indicating the new date of enrollment. And that would be January 2021. We can then update the file and we can process that application according to regular processing procedures. So not this two-stage process. This two-stage process, based on our current measures and policies, is only restricted to fall 2020. So, but don't panic, because in case there is a change and these measures extend to winter 2021, we can always send you an AIP letter down the line. So if all of your documents are in your application, we could potentially bring your file all the way up to almost visa issuance. Right now, we can't issue any visas because the VACs are still closed, but we can process your application. So for winter 2021, for those who haven't yet applied, please don't be afraid. Submit your application as soon as possible. For the ones who've already submitted an application and are now deferring to a winter 2021 intake, just send us your updated letter of acceptance. You can send this by email or upload via web form, and we can update your file, and your visa, once it's issued, will also have the new dates on there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alina. Next question is around Duolingo test. It says, would IRCC accept Duolingo under non-STS, the general category for study permit?
At this time, IRCC is not accepting any online English language tests. So all language test results must be done through in-person testing. Thank you.
The next question, are a student who lodged their visa in the month of March after March 18 and waiting for decision but had to defer to September intake required to upload new offer letter, acceptance letter, which I think you kind of answered that already by sending you guys the acceptance letter to the web form. I don't know if you would like Elena to add anything else to it.
Yeah, so I'll say that the applications that we're currently processing, one of the major holdups for an AIP is literally this, that we're waiting for an updated letter of acceptance. So the sooner you send this to us, the faster we can get you your AIP. It doesn't have to be, I guess the DLI can submit to you their standard LOA letter indicating the new start date, and that's fine for us. If you can upload this via web form or send it to us via email as soon as possible, then we can move forward with your case. Otherwise, AIP remains pending.
And then I assume anyone that has submitted their visa for summer 2020 and they have not like updated you guys with the new acceptance that they require to do so, right? Because the winter, the summer 2020 has been pretty much done, and if they're starting fall or January, you guys require a new acceptance letter from them.
That's correct. So essentially, if your initial letter of acceptance indicates a start date that has now passed, or indicates a start date for which you cannot actually start the classes, and you will be deferring your enrollment to a future date, please send us those updated LOAs as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm removing some more questions just because it's been already answered. This is actually a very good question. So due to the lockdown and the whole pandemic, many students has decided to not apply for September or January intake due to the inefficient document and for other reasons. Would IRCC be more flexible about this education gap in following years, and how this will impact their visa in 2021 as example?
So for any gaps in education, you can always explain this in your motivation letter. And to me, this is very simply explained. Due to the pandemic, you couldn't travel, you couldn't start your classes. Perhaps you're not interested in online learning and you prefer in-person classes, hence why you're deferring your enrollment to a future semester. And that's a perfectly reasonable explanation to the gap in education.
Thank you so much. There is a lot of question around what's going to happen for winter. I avoid asking this because I know that Elena gonna say, we know what we know today, right? There is a lot of different department of government need to come together. The decision comes out. So sorry that if I'm not asking questions, it's gonna happen for winter when the students are allowed to come to Canada, because I know the answer would be, we'll update you guys as soon as. Right now, as Anandita said, whatever you guys heard was what we know till today, and no one knows what's gonna happen. And I don't know if Lena, you want to elaborate on that. I'd rather to not ask question that, like, how are we gonna know when the students come to Canada, as example.
So perhaps I can say that the Government of Canada is actively monitoring the situation, and this is how they base their decisions on whether or not to extend the travel restrictions, to cancel them, or to amend them. So the current travel restrictions will end on August 31st. So September 1st may see a new set of travel restrictions, may see the extension of the current travel restrictions, or may see them canceled completely. It all depends on what's happening on the ground. So this pandemic is global. So Canada is recovering. India is in a bit of a different situation. So just stay tuned to all the news that we're updating on our website, on social media. In terms of winter 2021, you can apply for your visas now if you want to, and where we can make decisions. So like I said, we can't issue visas right now, but once vax reopen, we can start issuing visas. If you aren't able to go for winter 2021 because travel restrictions may still be in play, or there are other things preventing you from going as a result of the pandemic and you want to defer, at least you already have your application submitted. And if there is a decision on that, even better, right? You're basically ahead of the game. So don't be afraid to do that. And frankly, so some students who already had visas for, say, the May 2020 semester never made it, and now they're deferring. Once the vax reopen, we can just reissue those visas with a new dates if they wanted to, or just travel to Canada on the existing visas and then get an extension there. You can do the same thing if you are unable to travel to Canada for winter 2021, but at least your visa's already in play. Right now, winter 2021, yes, we don't know if it's going to be online, if the travel restrictions will still be in place, or if Canada will be reopened and you can actually go to class in person. But think of all your options and try thinking a bit of a step ahead. Like I said, go ahead and submit that visa application, because to me, you already intend to go to Canada, whether it's winter 2021 or a later semester. And if the intention is to be there physically, you can always use that visa for a later semester.
Exactly.
Don't think that you have to apply all over again.
Yeah. And Elena, two questions around that. One is there any update that when vax are opening? Second question follow that is uh, let's say, for example, I got my visa, it's a year visa and is a stamp in my passport, but I didn't make it. Can you little elaborate on how students can literally request the extension even from their home country and then get that visa with explanation maybe?
So what you can ask for is a document reissuance. So you'll need to provide an explanation why you weren't able to use the visa, the document. So for example, someone who applied in January 2020 for a start date in May 2020, they couldn't come because of the travel restrictions. So now they're starting maybe January 2021, and it's for a year program. That visa will be expired by the time you actually are ready to travel to Canada. We understand this. So what you can do is send us an explanation why you weren't able to travel, return to us your passport with visa, and then there's a $30 fee to replace that document, that visa. So we can print it with a new dates so that it will cover your entire program from the new start date. In addition to this, you should also submit to us a copy of your new letter of acceptance with a new start date.
Thank you, Elena. And Elena, do you guys have the update when the VAC's gonna open? What is the latest update around that?
So we're monitoring the situation closely, and talks are happening all the time about when it might be safe enough to reopen the VACs. At this time, we don't have an estimated date, but these are discussions that are happening regularly because we want them to reopen. Like, don't think we don't. We really do want them to reopen, but we also want to be safe about reopening because it's not only about the health and safety of the VAC staff, but also of everyone who's coming into the VACs, right? This is primarily our concern about why the VACs remain closed. So we really do ask everyone's patience. All of the measures that we've introduced with respect to study permit processing is really to address the fact that the VACs are closed, that there is limited operations with various institutions and businesses and panel physicians, and we understand that it's very difficult to get us all the things we need to complete your application and give you a visa. So we're hoping that all of these measures will give you more confidence in applying for and investing in that Canadian education, like whether it be for fall 2020 or a later semester.
Thank you so much. And the next question is around the PGWP. By the way, to our audience, I did share a link for PGWP for Government of Canada's website, which actually the whole very clear guidance came out yesterday. So I did share that link. But Elena, the question is, we know a lot of students study 1 year PG postgraduate. And the question is, would that 50% only go to that 1 year PG so they cannot study more than one semester, or would it be if they're doing two of 1 year PG, can they finish the first year PG online and then come to Canada for the second year PG? Can you little elaborate on that, please?
So the way the current policy is written, it's 50% of a program, so not 50% of the total learning that you're doing. So if you're doing a 1 year postgraduate program, you'll have to do 1 semester in India or wherever you may be, and then 1 semester in Canada. And if you're doing 2 back-to-back PG, then you'll have to do 1 semester each here, and then finish it off once you're in Canada.
Thank you so much, Alina. Next question is actually a very good question. It's around, can me as a student submit my application and start my program online, or do I have to wait for my pre-approval, the first stage approval?
So the current measures and policies indicate that if you submit your application before September 15, you can qualify for this 2-stage process. So as long as your study permit application has been submitted, you can start that online courses, and then once you receive your AIP down the line, that entire semester will count towards your PGWP.
Thank you so much. And there are a lot of questions around the refund policy of the schools. I'm not going to ask Alina those questions because those are depend on the university or college that you have applied to. Next question is, first of all, thanks for the information. Is there any difference between the school and university that the students going? I understand the schools are required to attend the schools, and some they're not required and they're doing the normal online. Would that make any changes in travel restriction?
So if I understand the question correctly, some courses are fully online and some are not. Am I correct?
Yes, I think what I think from the question, if the school is not online and they're requiring the students to be in the country, how that works.
Okay, so right now the travel restrictions in place until August 31st indicate that you need a visa that was issued on or before March 18 as one of the requirements to be able to travel to Canada right now. So even if you have a visa issued to you after March 18, and your courses this fall require you to be physically in Canada, you will not be permitted to travel because you're restricted from traveling to Canada. If you have a visa that was issued to you on or before March 18 and you have this physical need to be in Canada because you do have physical in-person classes, then yes, you would be qualified to travel to Canada to attend those classes.
Thank you so much. Elena, next question is actually not related to pandemic, as around SDS and non-SDS, and they wonder whether the visa success rates are different between SDS and non-SDS.
Yes, SDS tends to have a higher approval rate than non-SDS. Why? The documents required for SDS makes it much easier for a visa officer to be satisfied that all of the requirements for this AIP, so that you're a genuine student, that you have all the funds necessary, etc., are all encompassed in all of those documents that are mandatory for SDS. So as long as you provide all of those documents and you meet all of the requirements of SDS, these are all check marks for us in terms of approving your application. For non-SDS, when you're missing any of those documents that we find in SDS, then we have to go into a deeper analysis. Maybe we're not satisfied with the type of document that you've submitted. All these things factor in that tend to drop that approval rate for the non-SDS stream.
Got it. There is a really good question, which I think it answers many people, students that were currently in Canada. So there is a student that was in Canada, as example, went to their back home country and they got stuck due to the COVID. So the student says, can I continue my whole program online because I was already in Canada doing my studies? So is returning a student. Second thing, if I come to the border, do I still have to show that I'm essential, considering that I've been in Canada before?
So just so that I get all the facts of this question correct. So this person was studying in Canada already, in-person classes, and then they moved to online classes because of the pandemic. And they started the online classes here, like outside of Canada or inside of Canada?
I believe I think the student is outside of Canada because he's
Outside of Canada. Okay, great.
and then he wants
So as a
yes,
he
go ahead.
wants to return.
Yes.
Yes. So so that person would have been issued a visa before March 18. So that's a check of one of the requirements to go. And in terms of essential requirements, one of the other ways you could demonstrate that it is essential for you to return. For returning students who've basically been living in Canada and had come back to their home country where they wanted to spend a short vacation, see their family, etc., they're essentially considered living in Canada, be that temporary, but they're essentially living in Canada. All of their things are there, they've set up a life there, etc. So we would permit those persons, of course, to return to Canada because, like I said, they're essentially living there now. As long as their visa is still valid, as long as the reason for that visa is still valid, i.e., if it is a study permit visa that they have, that there are still courses to be taken, whether online or in person in Canada, that's perfectly fine. You can return to Canada as long as that visa is still valid and the reason for that visa is.
Thank you so much. Next question. It's the question is more around the AIP, the first stage approval processing time. They're saying like schools on one hand, they're kind of like asking, putting deadline for the students to let them know that if they have a visa or not. At the other side, the students are not aware on how long would it take if they submit their visa for the first AIP process, the first approval stage, considering if they're meeting all the requirements. Can you a little bit elaborate on that, please? Alina, are you still with us?
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you now.
Yes. Okay, sorry. So the question is processing times and how soon they can get their AIP. Is that
Yes,
correct?
correct.
Yes. So I always recommend, you know, pandemic or not, you need to submit your visa application as soon as possible. And if you can submit your visa now with all of the required documents, will we be able to get you your AIP before fall 2020 start? Yes.
Okay.
As long as all of the documents we need are there, yes.
So that's good news. So still, if people submit their complete documents today, they will be able to have their AIP in hand, hopefully before September start date, but they need to submit it ASAP. And as Alina mentioned, if you do submit your visa and your school's obviously giving you that flexibility to start without having visa, that time counts toward of your PGWP, and if you get your AP and the first approval, you kind of didn't risk it. So government of Canada has done a phenomenal job on giving enough flexibility to a student, so the students would necessarily not be at the lost point, and they can get their studies started, and they can start their education if they tend to reduce the gap.
If I may just add to that question, so even if, just in case, the AIP doesn't come just before the fall 2020 semester, as long as your application was submitted before September 15 and you get your AIP later, it doesn't matter if you've already started your course, that entire semester will count towards your PGWP.
Thank you so much, Elena. Next question is, it says, if the student has received unconditional letter of acceptance letter from a DLI, do they still require to submit their IELTS? Considering they're not
Yes.
on it, yes.
Yes. So whether it's IELTS or another form of English language test, yes, you still need to submit it. There are some certain circumstances where we may waive it. So for example, if you've studied in a country like the US or Australia or the UK, and you've completed a program there or high school there where the language medium of the school of the program was English, we could waive that requirement.
Thank you, Elena. And to just add to our audience, this is more a requirement for South Asia. South Asia, it's not necessary anywhere. Elena's, correct me if I'm wrong, Elena. What you mentioned is more for South Asia.
Correct. So in case there's any other students here from other parts of the globe, each region has its own sort of rules regarding what's a requirement for those countries, because the profile of the students coming from those countries differ. So anything like really specific, most especially with relation to language requirements, is really very South Asia.
And many question, guys, around Duolingo tests. Alina already has mentioned they're not accepting any online that includes Duolingo, IELTS indicator, or TOEFL from home. The student has to have, should have done their test in person to be eligible for their visa. Some people said they missed the first 10 minutes of the presentation. We will share the presentation, guys, with you guys after the webinar is finished. So don't worry about that. Again, there is a question around the second stage approval. Does that apply only for fall program right now? Alina, I'll let you to elaborate on that because I know you already mentioned it, but
Yes, so the current policies and measures only refer to fall 2020, but again, there is a potential that it could be extended depending on what the situation is, and we won't know until a much later date.
thank you. There is question around a spouse visa. What really happened with the spouse dependent visa during this time?
So the current travel restrictions indicate that someone who is on a different type of visa where they may normally be restricted can travel to Canada as long as they're reuniting with a family member. So if the student is already in Canada, for example, and their spouse applies for an open work permit, that spouse can travel to Canada. Now, there's not really a lot of restrictions on workers in terms of travel restrictions, but they should also demonstrate either an essential need to travel, meaning they're in one of the necessary jobs that, like healthcare, for example, or they're reuniting with family.
Thank you so much. There is a lot of question and confusion around if the student has received their visa before March 18, do they need to send and get any approval letter from embassy in order to fly?
No, so we will not provide any authorization letters for travel to students at all. The only things you need to travel with you is your passport, your visa issued on or before March 18, and a document from your school indicating why you need to be in Canada. So not just the letter should not just state it is essential for you to be here. It should state it is essential for you to be here because there will be in-person classes. You are in a hybrid program. There are laboratories and workshops you need to attend to be physically present. So whatever those reasons may be should also be specified in that letter.
Thank you so much. Next question is around PTE. Would PTE generally be acceptable by RCAC on non-SDS category?
So we can accept PTE provided that the student provides us access to their results online. So when you're in the PTE portal, you can quote unquote send your results to IRCC through the PTE portal, and then we can access those results. Simply giving us your login and password is is not sufficient because sometimes like the site will ask us for security questions and whatnot, and we can't access them because we don't have this information. So please don't give us your login and password. Send it to IRCC through the PTE portal, and then we'll receive it on the other end. Thank you.
Thank you so much. All I think ended. So many questions. I apologize for people not be able to ask their question. I tried to pick up the question that were multiple times repeated. Alina and Anita, thank you so much for taking time your evening and our morning here. And to our amazing partner, thanks for being here. To our amazing guest students, hopefully this presentation and the time was useful for you guys, and some question that you may had have been answered. Once again, Elena and Anita, thank you so much. I know you guys been super busy in the past few months since the pandemic has started. So I just want to thank you for what you guys do and putting the students and their lives first and doing your best, hopefully, to come over this pandemic and go back to the normal routine.